When I was growing up, one of my mom's meals that was one of my least favorites was pinto beans. I don't know why. They're good, but I did not like them when I was a kid. And but the good news about that meal was it usually also included cornbread, and Dad would break out some honey, and that was one of my favorite things to eat. So, but you had to eat my pintos. And I thought about that as I was thinking about these lessons. This morning's lesson, if you weren't here, was a kind of a difficult one, I think. It was a difficult story, a difficult topic, and it was about dealing with sin and having those uncomfortable conversations and the necessity to do that when the opportunity or when the occasion presents itself. And that to me is like eating pinto beans. It's necessary, but it's not a pleasant thing to think about or talk about. This lesson is our cornbread and honey, for me anyway. I'm excited. So I do have to give you a couple of little warnings. One is I'm going to use a lot of sports analogies. And I told Mickey that he would be better at preaching this lesson than me. He said, why? I said, same reason Zach would be better at preaching a farming lesson than me. I was in the marching band, so, I'm going to do my best about these sports analogies. But the other thing is I am going to make a couple of Alabama references. I got to get those in before this next season starts. So, probably our heyday is about over. But anyway, with all that said, I think everybody understands that in most athletic competitions, whether it's individual competitions like the Olympics or whether it's team sports, the mental aspect of the game is huge. Some say 80 to 90% of it. I think that, assuming you have everything else, the physical characteristics, and that you've done all the practice and the hard work, then it becomes a mental thing when it's time to execute. And just about everybody recognizes that. Our coach Saban talked about it quite a bit. This was a story that was the headline of the story anyway from 2021, and in that article he was interviewed. And he talked a lot about it. He talked about being prepared mentally, having the right mindset. He talked about mental focus, mental practice, mental preparation, and that how important that was to being ready and to eliminating errors and performing well. In the very next season, in 2022, Tennessee beat Alabama for the first time in the Saban era. And after that, he was interviewed about what happened and how they lost. And he attributed a lot of it to the mentality that they had going into the game. One of the quotes was, coming out of the locker room, our players always chant. They weren't chanting. I said, why aren't you guys chanting? What's up with that? It's not that they didn't want to do it. It's not that they're not trying. I just think that we've got to place our focus in the right place and our psychological disposition in the right place. So a big part of coaching is having the team mentally prepared for the task at hand. And I think we've all seen those championship games and other things where maybe even the better team lost in some cases because their mind wasn't in the game. They weren't mentally focused. They made mental mistakes. And so with all of that said, we're going to be continuing in 1 Peter today. And we're going to look at what Peter has to say about mental preparation and having our head in the game when it comes to the life of a Christian. So 1 Peter chapter 1, which is where we've been the last few lessons, and we're going to just continue with that. First point that I want to make is beginning with the end in mind. A man named Stephen Covey wrote a book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. A very good book. The second of the 7 habits, begin with the end in mind. Have a picture of success. When I was little, I did play Little League type sports, and I was terrible at most of them. At baseball, I was always sure the ball was going to hit me. It just looked like it was coming right at my face every time. And so Dad would try to coach me to be better, and he would say, you need to imagine, he said the great players see themselves hitting the ball, and you need to have this mental image of success, picture yourself doing it. And Peter gives us this mental image of success. This was from last week's lesson, but in verse 8 and 9 of 1 Peter 1, beginning before that, he talks about the inheritance that we have, our living hope, that things that are laid up for us in heaven. That was last week's lesson. And these are things that we have by faith. And verse 8 and 9 says, though you have not seen him, talking about Jesus, you love him. Though you do not now see him, you believe in him and rejoice with joy that's inexpressible and filled with glory, obtaining the outcome of your faith, the salvation of your souls. So by faith, we can picture the finish line. By faith, we see Jesus. By faith, we know that he lives. By faith, we know that we have this hope laid up for us. And that's a joyful thing. And that's a mental image of success that we need to have. And it's interesting that Peter begins with that. He kicks off a letter with that in verse, I think, 3 beginning. That God has blessed us with this hope that we have in Christ, that this inheritance that's imperishable and kept in heaven for us. In verses 10 through 12, which we're not going to focus on in this lesson, he talks about how this salvation was something that the prophets long ago had longed for and wanted to look into, that even the angels longed to look into it. And so this was something that had been building for a long time and for centuries, really. And now he's writing to people who had been on the receiving end of it. And it reminds me perhaps of, imagine you're a new player on a team that is poised to make a championship run. But maybe it comes at the end of long, hard years of rebuilding and years where things were tough. And there were players who probably were on the team and they didn't get to see the success, but they were part of helping to build the momentum and they believed in what they were trying to accomplish. But now it's your turn and you get to dress out and put on the jersey. And it's your turn to take the field. And, a lot has come before you. But now you get your opportunity under the sun. And that's really what our life is as Christians. Many things have come before us. The prophets of old, they were all looking forward to what was going to be accomplished. Even the angels longed to look into it. But now as Christians, we get to receive it. We get to enjoy it. So we need to be ready. So verse 13 is really where our text is going to be. And it starts with preparing your minds for action and being sober-minded. Set your hope fully on the grace that will be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. So the first thing is preparing your minds for action. Get your head in the game. This is really where I got that thought came from. Like you need to prepare your mind for action. What does that mean? Well, if you happen to have the King James, if anybody here happens to have that, if you don't, but you might remember reading when you were younger, it says, gird up the loins of your mind. And that's an interesting phrase, to gird up the loins of your mind. So I want to kind of explain what that's about. Here's a how-to on girding up your loins. So it was from at the ancient times when they wore these tunics that reached down to the ground. But if you were going to do anything like hard work or action, like if you were going to run or if you're going to be in battle, you would need to gird up your loins. So this is like step by step. You gather them up, you do this, you do that, you tie it up. And then by the end of it all, you've got yourself girded up and you're ready for action. If you were to look back to the days of Elijah, remember when it hadn't rained in a long time? And then he prayed and he saw a little cloud and he girded up his loins and he ran all the way back to Jerusalem. So, if you had this long outfit on, you wouldn't be able to sprint in it or fight or do some kind of work. But to do those things, to prepare for action, you have to gird up your loins. And this phrase is used in a number of places in the Old Testament. In Proverbs 31, remember the Proverbs 31 woman who was so virtuous? But she was also a woman of action. She was always doing stuff. And it says in verse 17, she dresses herself with strength and makes her arms strong. But actually, if you have the King James, it says she girds up her loins. And so it's she's mentally prepared for action. In Jeremiah, in Jeremiah chapter 1, when God is calling the young man Jeremiah to be a prophet, he tells him, dress yourself for work. Again, that's the same phrase, gird up your loins. Arise, say to them everything that I command you. Do not be dismayed by them, lest I dismay you before them. Get ready, prepare yourself, dress yourself for work. At the end of Job, after Job and his friends have been going on and on for 30-something chapters, the Lord shows up in a whirlwind and he says to Job, who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Dress for action like a man. There's our phrase again. Gird up your loins. I will question you and you make it known to me. So what is all this saying? It's saying mentally get ready. Prepare yourself for various things. The Proverbs 31 woman was prepared for all of the work that she did. In Jeremiah, it's about prepare yourself to go carry this message to people who are not going to want to hear it. And in Job, it's about prepare yourself to give an answer. Prepare yourself to respond to my questions. And so all of these ideas of girding up your loins are preparing yourself for action. And we need to have a mindset that we're ready for action. If you think about it in the sports world, it would be to be dressed out and ready and have everything on so that you're ready when you can be called in to the game. You've probably seen players that are on the sideline who, for one reason or another, are not dressed out. And so maybe it's because they've been injured. And so this guy's part of the team, but he's clearly not ready to go in. He's not ready to go onto the field. He's been injured, so he's not all dressed out. He doesn't have his pads on. He's not, prepared. I can't tell you, by the way, I just remember how many times the kids would go to somewhere, playing soccer or something, they would call, I don't have my shin pads, or I don't, they're having to hurry and rush because they forgot or they forgot their cleats or something. It's like, well, if you don't have the equipment, you're not going to be ready when it's time. When the coach looks around and says, and you don't have the necessary stuff, you're not ready. So you need to be prepared. And if you're on the sideline, but you're dressed out, you've got yourself ready to go mentally, you're ready to be called into action, then you're going to be ready when the opportunity comes along. Oops, sorry. Paul puts it like this in 2 Timothy 2. Therefore, if anyone cleanses himself from what is dishonorable, he'll be a vessel for honorable use, set apart as holy, useful to the master of the house, ready for every good work. So part of getting our head in the game is being mentally prepared to spring into action, mentally prepared when the opportunity presents itself to be active, to take action, to do something. And if we're not mentally ready, just imagine, what if you're kind of like checked out and you're not really expecting to do something. You're not expecting to help somebody. You're not expecting to share the message. You're not thinking about those things, and you're not mentally prepared. If we're not, then opportunities will pass us by and we might not even see them because we're not even thinking about doing anything. So if we're going to be serving the master, ready for every good work, it begins with this mental preparation. Gird up the loins of your mind. Prepare your minds for action. Have it in your head that this week, today, that the opportunities may come your way to serve somebody else, to do something, to let your light shine. And if we have that mentality, then we'll be more likely to see those things and to be active when the moment comes. The next thing he says is be sober-minded. So he says, prepare your minds for action and being sober-minded. When we think about this word, sober-minded, the actual word that's translated that just means literally be sober. It's the word for being sober. And it has the meaning of, when you look up the definition, being sober, like literally, abstaining from wine, it means that, being not intoxicated. But it also has the meaning of being calm, collected in spirit, temperate, dispassionate, circumspect. So at a very literal level, you can't be sober-minded in this sense if you're literally intoxicated or impaired from some substance abuse. I mean, you can take it extremely literally, and it's still true. Like, how could you be sober-minded and ready if you are, not in your right mind? I mean, literally, that's true. But it also has a meaning that's a little broader than that. For example, in 1 Thessalonians 5, Paul uses the same word there when he's talking about the day of the Lord that would come as a thief in the night. But he says, you are not in darkness, brothers, for that day to surprise you like a thief. For you are all children of light, children of the day. We're not of the night or of the darkness. So let us not sleep as others do, but let us keep awake and be sober. For those who sleep at night. Those who get drunk are drunk at night. But since we belong to the day, let us be sober, having put on the breastplate of faith and love, and a helmet, the hope of salvation. It's interesting because it's sort of a mixture of literal and figurative words. Clearly, he's not saying to be a Christian, you can never go to sleep. I mean, we know that. Jesus slept. I mean, to be a human being, you have to rest. You have to sleep. He's not talking about physical sleep. But he is making a point that a lot of things go on at nighttime, including drunkenness. And I think that's probably talking literally. Literally, at night, there's a lot of partying going on. And we, as Christians, need to be sober. We need to be sober-minded. We need to be serious. We need to be alert and aware. If we're not, then how are we going to be ready when the opportunities come our way to be of service? Back in the 90s, in my high school days, the Buffalo Bills, you probably forgot they exist, but they went to 4 Super Bowls in a row and lost every one of them in the 90s. We watched a documentary on that recently. It's really kind of a heartbreaking story, as you can imagine, to get that close to the pinnacle and never be able to see it through. And I found an article on that. There was a safety for the Dallas Cowboys named Darren Woodson. The Cowboys beat them 2 of those 4 years, by the way. And he was interviewed about it, and he had his explanation for why the Buffalo Bills lost 4 years in a row. And here's what he said. As much as everyone talked about how much experience the Bills had back then, they partied harder than any other team. That's all we heard about the entire week in L.A., the first Super Bowl. They, the Bills, were out Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. A couple of guys got into altercations in clubs, older, veteran guys with the Bills. Experience doesn't mean that much. It's all about leadership. There's a reason they lost 4 Super Bowls. They partied harder than any other team. Now, that was just one person's perspective on it. That was and one of their opponents. But that was his explanation of how they made it to the Super Bowl 4 years in a row and lost every time. Is they spent the whole week leading up to it, partying. And as Christians, we're here in this world to be serving God, to be servants of God, to be letting our light shine. And if we're not sober and not sober-minded, we're not going to be much good. We're not going to be of any use to the Master. We're not going to be able to, do the things that He wants us to do. And there's also something much more serious than the Super Bowl at stake. In chapter 5 of 1 Peter, verse 8, it says, be sober-minded, the same word, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around as a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. So he's saying you need to be alert. You need to be awake. You need to be on the lookout, because we have a powerful enemy who is looking for someone to destroy. He's like a lion prowling around, and you don't want to be half out of it. You don't want to be, laid up, asleep, spiritually speaking, because the enemy is looking for someone, and you will be easy prey if you are not in your right mind. So, prepare your mind for action. Let's go back to chapter 1, verse 13. Prepare your mind for action. Be sober-minded. And then he says, set your hope fully on the grace that will be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. So set your hope fully on the goal, on the grace that will be brought to you. In other words, we need to keep our vision, we need to keep our minds focused on the goal, why we're here, what we're striving for, what we're trying to do. And that way we can keep our mind in the game. We can keep our focus on what is important and what matters. Paul talks about this in Philippians 3. I thought I had it on the screen, but I don't. Let's turn to Philippians 3. When Paul talks about pressing on to the goal. He says, beginning in verse 12, not that I have already obtained this, or am already perfect, but I press on to make it my own, because Christ Jesus has made me His own. Brothers, I do not consider that I have made it my own, but one thing I do, forgetting what lies behind and straining forward to what lies ahead, I press on toward the goal for the prize of the upward call of God in Christ Jesus. Brother Kurt talked about the life of Paul and how impressive it is, the things he was able to accomplish. And he gives us a little insight here into his mentality. He saw a finish line, he saw a goal, and he just pressed and kept going to reach his goal. And that is the resurrection of Christ, the upward call, the prize that's waiting at the end. But notice that not only did he press on toward the finish line, but he was also talking about his own growth and perfection. Notice he says in verse 12, I have not obtained this, or am already perfect. In other words, in the present tense, he's not complete, but he is pressing on. He says it again in verse 13, I haven't yet made it my own. And so I believe not only did he focus on the finish line, but he focused on growing and being mature and striving for perfection even in the here and now. And in our passage in Peter, he tells us the same thing. In 1 Peter chapter 1, let's continue reading in verses 14 through 16. As obedient children, do not be conformed to the passions of your former ignorance. For as He who called you is holy, so you also be holy in all your conduct, since it is written, you shall be holy, for I am holy. So we are called to not just hang in there till we get to the finish line, not just keep our eyes on the prize at the end. That's true. That is what we just have to focus on. But also striving in the here and now, moment by moment, for perfection, for holiness, to be like God. When Coach Saban always talked about his way of coaching players. He coached in to not pay attention to the scoreboard, but just focus on the next play. Like, what do you got to do now? What do you need to do, and do it to the best of your ability in the here and now, like moment by moment. And that's the idea here, that moment by moment, we need to strive for holiness. Notice that he says, in all your conduct. Be you also, verse 15, be holy in all your conduct. From the moment we wake up to the moment we fall asleep. Strive for holiness at home. Strive for holiness on the job. Strive for holiness at school. Strive for holiness when we're hanging out with our friends. Strive for holiness when we go on vacation. We never take a break from holiness. We never take a play off, as the coaches say. We should not have a time of our life where when I get together with these friends, when I go over here to this place, I kind of set aside my integrity. I set aside I kind of let things down, and I can, No, he says, strive for holiness in all your conduct. The goal is to live and try to be like God in everything that we do, in our conversations, in our work, in every aspect of life, to be striving for holiness. And how important is that? Notice what we're told in Hebrews chapter 12. Strive for peace with everyone and for the holiness without which no one will see the Lord. This striving for holiness is not just something for the overachiever Christians. I believe, I didn't think to double check this, but I'm pretty sure the same word behind this word holy is the same word, the root of it anyway, for where we get our word saints. I think that basically saint means a holy one. And, down through the years, somehow the idea caught on that saints were just sort of super Christians. Like in sort of the Catholic tradition, in order to be made a saint, you have to really stand out. You have to be somebody, like those are like the Hall of Fame kind of like rare, very rare people get to achieve that. But actually the Bible uses the word to refer to all Christians, all believers. Holiness and striving for this goal is not just something that the rare, one in a million Christian does. It's something that we all have this goal. Every one of us should be saints. Every one of us should be striving for holiness in all of our conduct, understanding that that's what God desires from us. So, in life, you can do all the right things and still lose, unfortunately. As a team, as a player, you could give it your all. You could prepare mentally, physically. You could practice. You could do everything you're supposed to do and be up against somebody who's better than you. Somebody who's faster than you, a team that's better than you, whatever. You could do everything right and still lose. But spiritually, we don't have to worry about that. Spiritually, we are guaranteed the victory through Christ. He's already won. And if we're in Him, then we're guaranteed to be victorious. But between now and then, we do face an adversary. Like Peter says, we have someone who is trying to devour us. And therefore, we need to keep our head in the game. We need to begin with the end in mind. As Peter did his letter, he starts by talking about the inheritance that we have laid up for us in heaven. We need to think about that because it will motivate us. Why are we here? What are we trying to achieve? I know there's teams that they decide, in the preseason what their goal is. They want to be champions. They don't just think of that later. Well, we seem to be doing pretty good. What do you think? They have that goal from the beginning. They have something that they're shooting for. We also have a goal in mind. We need to be mentally prepared for action. Gird up the loins of your mind. Get yourself ready because opportunities are going to come your way. And you need to be of service. You need to be working. You need to be sharing the message. And we need to be mentally ready. We need to be sober-minded. We need to be alert and awake and aware and circumspect. We have an enemy. We have an adversary. We need to be on our game. Keep our guard up. And finally, we need to focus not just on the final goal, but focus on the goal of holiness. Focus on the striving for godliness in everything that we do, moment by moment, play by play, so to speak, always trying to improve and trying to become more like God. And if we do these things, and if we hold on to our faith, then by God's grace and power, we are guaranteed that one day we will stand with Him in glory. What an awesome hope that is. Perhaps there's someone here this morning who needs to make something right in your life. We want to have this opportunity to give you the invitation to say, if there's any way that we can be of assistance, we certainly want to do that. If you're interested in the Bible study, if you want to If you already know what you need to do and you're ready to do something about it today, whether it be having your sins washed away in baptism or repenting of sin, asking for the prayers of the church, whatever is weighing on your heart, if you would let us know, we'd be glad to help while we stand and sing.